to the void when I can't see. Lift up my head in every valley. Let your joy be greater than my grief. And I have set my heart, set my heart on you. You have every part of me. I set my heart on you. You make a way when none is found. You tell the roaring oceans to bow. I believe you're moving even now, right here, right now, yeah. And I have set my heart, set my heart on you. You have every part of me. I set my heart on you. I have set my heart, I set my heart on you. You have every part of me. I set my heart on you. Set my heart on you. Nothing will ever break me, ever slay me. All my hope in you, and nothing will ever shake me, overtake me. All my hope in you, and nothing will ever break me, ever slay me. All my hope in you, and nothing will ever shake me, overtake me. All my hope in you. And I have set my heart, set my heart on you. You have every part of me. I set my heart on you. I have set my heart, set my heart on you. You have every part of me. I set my heart on you. I set my heart on you. And nothing will ever break me, ever slay me. All my hope in you, and nothing will ever shake me, overtake me. All my hope in you.
Hey, New Hope. You've heard me say it before, but I want to let you know we are not open yet. We are working very hard as a staff and as a church to prepare for that day when we can come back together. In the meantime, I really want you to subscribe to New Hope News. Many have given us their email, but we're finding many saying, I'm not getting it. So please go to our website, click on our menu, go to Get Connected, fill out the subscribe now information. You'll be on our list so that you can get current updates on coming back to church as we get closer and closer to that day. We want you to get all the updates. You can get it on our website. You can also get that on our New Hope News. You can also get that on all of our social media venues. In the meantime, the county has approved for people to have religious watch parties. If you would like to invite up to 25 people to your house, you can do that according to the county's regulations. We want to encourage you to consider inviting friends, neighbors, relatives, join together and watch our services together and have a Bible study together, whatever you need to do to get that done and get your spiritual nourishment. We're praying for you. We're believing that God is going to continue to do great things in your lives. God bless you. We'll see you on Sunday morning.
Good to see everybody tonight. We're hitting chapter 6 today, right?
7.
Chapter 7, you're right.
Last week was 6.
But we'll recap on chapter 6.
That's up to you, man. You got the opener.
So one of the things we always want everybody to do, make sure that you get all your notifications for social media, so Instagram and Facebook, and just get those and then go to the website. I know we're always saying that, so please take some time, go to the website, and they could subscribe to New Hope News by hitting Get Connected.
That's right.
It'll scroll down, it'll hit subscribe, and then you put in all your information. And you'll get all kinds of weekly news that tells you more about a reopening and all that stuff.
Yep.
So I think it's important, though, make sure you have all your social media going because Pastor's on there quite a bit, giving updates and all that stuff. So, well, let's hit chapter 7. But let's look back at chapter 6. At the end of chapter 6, there's some drama going down. And Jesus challenges a bunch of disciples, people who are following him, and then the 12 disciples. And he challenges them so much in what it's going to take to follow him that they end up, a whole bunch of them just stopped following Jesus. And it wasn't at that time exciting for the other disciples because they're wondering why in the world would you say that? You just lost half of your crowd that was following you. And then it jumps into chapter 7 and it refers back to it. So that's why I felt it was important to talk about chapter 6 because it refers to it in chapter 7. And it says, right off the get-go, it says, after these things. So after those things that I just shared with you, it goes into Jesus with his disciples, and it was during the Festival of Tabernacles, and they were making their way up to Judea. And during that time, the disciples thought it would be a great idea. They were kind of not forcing Jesus, but they were kind of like strongly encouraging him. And they were saying, hey, Jesus, you should go up to the Festival of Tabernacles and you should kind of show them what you're all about. Do some miracles, show some signs and wonders, and really know people what you're all what you're all about. And so Jesus goes, he just stops them and he pretty much says, hey, it's not my time. For you, it's okay for you guys to go to the Festival of Tabernacles and just go, but I'm staying behind. And he says this, he says, the time of opportunity that I am looking for has not yet come, but your time is always ready. In other words, you guys go, you're fine, but my timing is very important during this time. And I love because John, the writer of the Gospel of John, uses this word. In the Greek, it's kairos, and it means time, and it means opportune time. In other parts of John, he uses the word hora, which is Spanish, right? Que hora es, and it's for time, and it means more of like God's timing, God's perfect timing.
Right.
But we're talking about this opportune time, and Jesus stops them. Go ahead. I'm waiting for my opportune time. And so there's a few things we're going to talk about from this passage, 2 things that we want to learn in regards to God's timing. And so why don't you go ahead and hit it, Pastor Bill?
Yeah. You know, the first thing that we see and kind of draw from this is that it's impossible to force the hand of God.
Yeah.
And, it's a great analogy of that and a great story that kind of reminds us of that. And then I'll make some application to our life. But you hit that verse that's kind of the key and kind of the tipping point of what Jesus is trying to communicate.
Yeah.
It's what it hinges on right there in verse 6 when it says, that his time has not yet come. Jesus often spoke about his time or his timing in that way, that his hour has not yet come or his time has not yet come. And And what was he really saying in that? What was he implying? That I'm sure that even in this situation that we're referencing in chapter 7, that they may not have understood completely. He just made the statement, hey, this isn't my time. Like you said, you guys go, but I'm hanging back here because it's not my time.
Yeah.
So, what was he saying? How do they come to understand the real meaning of what he was implying in that, his timing and his hour? And it's I think what it's telling us is that the timing of God is perfect.
Yeah.
I remember hearing, and I've heard it over and over. I've said it. I think I've probably heard you say it, Chris, that, God's never too early and he's definitely never too late, that his timing is perfect. And it may not feel like that when we're faced with situations in our life, but it doesn't negate the fact that God's timing is perfect.
Yeah.
And it's illustrated over and over again in the Gospels with Jesus referring to that. The hour has not yet come, and my time. This isn't my time. And his brothers were there as well. And how hard would that be to be the brother of Jesus?
Yeah, that's
you talk about sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
I've got 4 kids, and they're always, who's top dog. And you got Jesus as your brother.
Yeah.
But so I think they were struggling in the fact because they knew him as brother before they knew him as Messiah.
Yeah.
And so that transition for them trying to make that leap into the claims of Christ as the Messiah was, I'm sure, so much more difficult for them. So even in this encounter in chapter 7 of the Gospel of John, it was almost a bit of a dare for them to challenge him to go to Jerusalem and leave where he felt like this is the place, the time of where I'm supposed to be for this hour, for this time. It was almost a bit of a dare to see if he would move in that direction. They still weren't really convinced that their brother was the Messiah.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they were able to reconcile the things that they had seen and still not believed. But that's true for us too today.
Yeah.
That we can see things that God does and see things in ways that Jesus moves in our life, and we still have doubt. We still have a lack of faith, and because something else comes along and we forget. And we leave behind the things that Jesus has already done in our life.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to kind of tail off in our faith and our understanding of God's presence in our life. They may have been thinking that to make that move made more sense. That they were better off, or Jesus was better off in Jerusalem instead of where he was, which was in Galilee.
Yeah.
And the Galileans were hot-tempered. They weren't super responsive all the time, even in the midst of Jesus doing the miracles. And they felt like it would be safer. It would be more of a celebration, that they would welcome Jesus more. So I think they were trying to make it a little bit easier and a little bit more, just a little bit of a better place for Jesus to be able to now have the freedom and the opportunity to a crowd that was a little bit maybe more receptive.
Yeah.
In spite of the fact that he did all these amazing things already in Galilee. It maybe would have given Jesus a bigger stage and more visibility. And I think they may have.
What's that? They were thinking that.
I think they were thinking that. And maybe they were trying to be his manager. They were trying to manage him. And
they just lost several people. They're like, maybe we got
to do something, man. We got to get better promotion here. We got to market this quite, and we got to set it up for success. And it made more sense to them that. But in all of that, they were missing the key ingredient, and the key is that the timing of God. And a crucial fact in that is that Jesus does things in God's timing, not in man's timing. That he moves according to the leading of God, not according to the leading of man, even his brothers, even by the pressure maybe in that situation to move out of where God placed him. And I remember a discipler in my life that when I felt I was faced with an uncertainty or a decision that I needed to make or just unclear on what my next move was or my next step, he would always challenge me. Jim Argue would always say to me, what was the last thing that God told you to do? And I would be able to try to, figure that out. Well, this is what I'm doing now. And he said, well, you don't move until God says to do the next thing. because God's timing is perfect.
That's wisdom.
And so, just kind of, I've used that, and I've spoken that into so many other people that have come into my life, into their heart, and reminded myself along the way as well that God's planted you, God's placed you, and wherever you're at, whether it's in your neighborhood, in your family, in your work environment, in the city that we live in, that God has placed us and positioned us for such a time as this.
Yeah.
May not be forever, but it's for now.
Yeah.
So it's God's timing for the here and the now. We can sometimes be like Jesus' brothers, that our faith wanes and our faith may be challenged, and we doubt Jesus. We doubt certain things in our life that if God will, or will God do this, or can God do this, and the impossibilities of God, is that true that God can do the impossible?
Yeah.
We may even try to challenge God. We might even try to, in a situation where we're struggling, even kind of whether we say it out loud, articulate it, or feel it in our heart that, man, God, if you really loved me, then you would do this for me. If you really cared the way that your word says you care about me, then you would provide for me in this way.
Yeah.
And we're not seeing it maybe the same way. Our perspective is super limited, but God's perspective is perfect.
Oh, yeah.
He sees the entirety of it. And maybe it's even we sometimes might want to bargain with God. You ever bargained with God?
Yeah.
That God, if you do this, I'll do this.
Yeah.
Right? That if you do this for me, then I'll do this for you.
Yeah.
And God doesn't work that way. We can't bargain with God on his timing. We just continue to serve, and we follow, and we let God be God in our life. And it's a crucial lesson, Chris, I think for us today, in just the time and the season that we're living in. And things are real difficult, and not only on a big scale nationally or globally, but individually in our lives, and in all of our lives, we're being challenged, and there's difficulty, and there's challenges in our life, there's uncertainty, and maybe things aren't making a whole lot of sense in our life right now, and obviously in the world, things are just, it's like the world's been flipped upside down. It's wow, what's taking place, But what we might even ask the question, why isn't God doing something? Why isn't God moving? Where are you, God, in the midst of all this? But we've got to remember that our sight is limited, and so often we only see from a human perspective. Yeah. And to kind of get ourselves to where we see through the eyes of Christ, and in some way we can begin to position ourselves to see things the way that God sees things, and through Christ that we see that there are no limitations. Where there's limitations with man, there's no limitations with God. Isaiah 55, 8 and 9 says, God's ways and God's thoughts are not man's thoughts.
It isn't. You're right.
So that's kind of where I want to leave that. You have another point you want to make on this?
Yeah, definitely. I think of timing, and sometimes it's just common sense. And Jesus was totally using common sense, because he knew if he were to go up there was a bunch of the Jewish people at that time, they wanted to kill him. Yeah. And so I don't think the other guys were thinking about that. A lot of times when you're with other people and you're leading other people, you think a little different than everybody else. And so he was going, maybe that may not be a good idea if I go up there, because it was a mixed group of people. There were some people up there that believed, man, I heard about this guy, Jesus. I think he's God. And other ones say, hey, I think he's a lunatic. Another guy is saying, hey, he's breaking the law. And somebody else is saying, no, he's fulfilling the law.
Right.
And so there's just all kinds of people up there. And he's going, it's probably not a good time to go up there right now. But I love his timing, because it was smart, because if you get to the party early, everybody sees you. If you go in the middle of it, you can kind of blend in. And when you read the story, he kind of shows up in the middle of everything. So sometimes it could be a year. Sometimes it could be an hour. But I think it's important to really, really know, God's timing. And so this whole story is about the timing of Jesus, but then sometimes I think of our timing, for us to use wisdom, for us to use common sense, for us to, get good counsel for, the timing of things.
Yeah.
And there's just so much to figuring out God's timing for our life. And I looked at this, I just went, that's so good. And and realizing what is an opportune time, that it's a God timing. And once again, Jesus is always following with the Father's speaking to him, and he just knew just to wait. And Jesus was in the waiting room quite a bit, and he knew that when he heard the Father, it was so important to just be obedient to that. And he did that his whole life. And for me, sometimes it's hard to do just one day. So I want to make this last point here. It is impossible to treat Jesus with indifference. And so I want to look at a couple things. When it comes to God, when it comes to Jesus, timing, God's timing, you should be looking at three things. And the very first thing is that you should be very interested in God's timing. That you should know your surroundings, be aware, test things and see where they're at. And just be very interested. Be a student sometimes of God's timing. I think being in God's word, being in prayer, just having people around you that are speaking life into you, people around you that are, they're kind of watchmen. They know the times and seasons of what's taking place, and be interested in that. I think that's a huge thing of just being a student of when is God's timing and really listening. I know when I'm interested in something, I pay special attention, and I become actually sometimes fixed on that one thing until it's done, until it's finished. And so I know that be very interested in God's timing. The other thing is be very concerned, not to take it lightly. There's been a lot of times, I think, in my life, in the life of our family, that waiting on God's timing, I was concerned because I didn't want to mess it up. And I didn't want to get in front of God. I didn't want to get behind him. I just wanted to have Jesus just pick me up and kind of take me where we're going. And with that, it's being very concerned. The more I'm concerned, the more that I'm taking the time and slowing down. I think I could be able to be in that opportune time that God's given me. And the last one is this, and know that it's important. I think especially now, I'm going to be 50 in a year, and it's
just a pup, man. Just a pup.
And so I know that it's important, because all of a sudden you're starting thinking, I had all that time to do the things that I needed to do, but now I have this limited time that I have. And when I look at it, I know this, because you have a lot of time to do a bunch of things. But I think it's limited to God opportunities, right? And God's timing, what he wants you to do. So who cares? I've missed a lot of things. I missed timing on certain things. But if I capture that moment, that's God's timing. It's so much more important than all the other things.
Well, I think we learn, though, right?
Yeah.
We learn to be in step with God. And we learn a lot of times by getting out of step.
Yep.
And you can sense when you kind of step away from, God's will, because there's the permissible will of God, that he allows us to kind of go our own direction. But the perfect will of God is when we're in step.
That's right.
And so I think we learn from that, and we can more quickly identify in our life when we're out of step.
Yeah.
And that's just growth. That's spiritual growth.
And it's being human too.
And it's being human, because we still get out of step. Yeah.
And testing it. I think human, we can miss it and we'll get frustrated. But I love it. God always comes back around and works with us. Yeah. And so that's the part that we go, okay, we obviously are not perfect, but God, his timing is perfect. His will is perfect. His goodness, he's perfect in all ways. And so we just got to come along the side of that. Yeah. And even going through, this chapter, and right off the, the first verse going up, what do we go through, about 9?
Yeah.
Just reading that story, there's so much in that's helped me. I know we have a few questions. You want to finish it up?
And just to encourage you to read that. Read the story in John 7, 1 through 9, and kind of just take some time and let it kind of soak in and kind of what we've talked about tonight, but then through the Word. A couple questions. So if you're doing a Bible study with your men's group or women's group or whatever group you're with, or if you're doing this on your own, just a couple thought-provoking questions. The first one is this: have you ever felt that God is not or was not doing something for you in the way that you thought it should go, or at the time that you thought it should take place? And I think that's a great question for us to ask ourselves frequently. That is, what is God doing, and how are we feeling about how God's moving in our life? But I think that's something that it can leave us kind of leave us wondering. So articulate that to your group, share that if you're in a group setting. And then the second one is this: what have you learned in the waiting? You talked about the waiting, and God is the God that opens doors in our life, and oftentimes doors shut as well. That God moves us out. And I think that sometimes we feel that as one door closes, automatically that next door of opportunity opens, but it's not always that way. Sometimes there's a hallway that we've got to make our way down to find that next door. But I think there's something to be learned. What have we learned? And that's the second question. What have you learned in the waiting, in the time of just waiting on God and trusting God and God's timing to open up that next door of opportunity in our life? And that could be on a lot of different levels. That could be with our careers. That could be family. That could be, if you're single, about being married. That could be, buying a house. That could be a lot of different things in our life, and making transition in our careers or whatever the case might be. But so wherever you're at today, maybe you're in that time of waiting. Maybe you're uncertain on what the next step is, and that's the faith walk as well. And I've prayed this with a lot of people, a lot of you maybe, that we have to take those steps of faith. And one of the things that I love to pray for people is that when we take that step of faith and our foot hits the ground, that we would sense the footprint of God, having already prepared a way for us and having already gone ahead of us and made a way. God makes a way in our life. And so, but when we're in that waiting period, what are we learning? Where's the growth taking place in our life?
So, hey, be patient, wait on God's timing. When you wait on God's timing, it's going to be an opportune time. You're going to see things come together, and you're going to be encouraged because you're waiting on Jesus.
I think, too, as a church, we're learning that now, aren't we, Chris? As a church, we're kind of in the waiting, right? We're in the waiting. We're waiting to be back together. We're waiting to have services. We're waiting on the county to release us. And so what are we learning in that? How are we growing? Not just being frustrated, not just being uncertain, but what is God doing? God knows what's happening. God's in control. Be praying. Be praying. One thing we can learn is that we can learn how to pray, more earnestly and more fervently through the time that we're in. So God bless you.
God bless you. We'll see you next week. Pastor Malcolm will be back doing the Bible study next week. But until then, have a great Bible study.
See you Sunday.
We'll see you Sunday.